Welcome back, everyone. Michael here with Offshore Citizen. Today we're going to discuss what has been widely considered for a very long time the premier name in banking, international, offshore banking, etc., and that is Swiss banking. So for a long time, obviously you're probably aware, the Swiss banking system was known, this was like the code name for bank secrecy. It was like Swiss bank secrecy, all one word. You might as well consider it the same. And that changed to some extent starting in 2009 when the IRS broke UBS, then 2011 when they broke Credit Suisse, then 2013 they broke basically the rest of the Swiss banks. And so nowadays, Swiss banking secrecy is sort of a lost thing. That being said, the sophistication of Swiss banking has remained something pretty potent as relative to much of the rest of the world. And so I'm going to discuss today, in response to some questions I was getting from a client about what are the Swiss banking options, how easy is it to open up, what do you get, what do you not get, where do they kind of sit in the world, and so we're going to dive in there. Before we do that, if you haven't already, please subscribe, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, hit the little all thing. We really appreciate your support. Try to produce great content for you every single day. And if you'd like help with international structuring for yourself personally, maybe you want to relocate somewhere, you're interested in second residencies, citizenships, personal tax planning, investing, etc., or for your business, you're interested in doing business abroad, lowering your corporate tax, getting offshore banking, forming the companies, setting up payment processing, hiring people abroad, etc., please reach out to us. You can book a call with me, calendly.com/Michael-Rosmer. There's a link in the description below, or you can send us a message through offshorecitizen.net or offshorecapitalist.com. Okay, so I would say that, as I was mentioning, for a long time, the Swiss banking system was renowned for their secrecy. Okay, so they had by law, and Swiss banking had secrecy covenants in it, really dating back to pre-World War II. There's a lot of money that got put into Switzerland in the Swiss banking system way back then. And actually there's kind of some controversy and scandal around the fact that a lot of people were then killed and they kept the money, So that was quite a historic place that the Swiss banking tradition has come from. That being said, in leading up to 2009, there was a whistleblower who basically said, hey, listen, all this money from US taxpayers is being hidden in these Swiss bank accounts. And really, a lot of people were not doing good tax planning, right? They'd just say, hey, listen, I can put my money in Switzerland. Who's ever going to know? Well, this is, by the way, one of the reasons why I advise people not to go and just say, hey, listen, who will catch me? It's like, well, they might not catch you today, but making the assumption that they won't catch you in the future is a big deal. And so what ended up happening was the IRS said, hey, listen, we expect you to turn over this information. Swiss said, nope, we're not going to do that. It goes against our Swiss bank secrecy laws. We would be committing a crime in Switzerland. And frankly, tax evasion is not a crime in Switzerland, so we don't recognize that. The US then put a massive amount of pressure, essentially saying, hey, listen, great, we're going to arrest a whole bunch of top-ranking bankers in the US because UBS UBS is the largest Swiss bank, and they have presence in New York and a bunch of different places. And so they had leverage that they could go after these people. And ultimately this led to them cracking it and having them agree to turn over. It was kind of like a quasi, how do we find that balance point in order to be able to turn that information over? They then basically used that precedent to go after Credit Suisse, the second largest Swiss bank, in 2011. And then they made deals with I think it was around 200 Swiss banks in 2013 and basically ended Swiss bank secrecy. This being said, the quality of service that you would get, the infrastructure, the polish, all of that stuff has been very high in Switzerland. And there's actually a very strong fintech space in Switzerland. So there's a lot of these fintech banks, as much as there are some of the older banks that have gone under, as much as I would say that there is a lot of Swiss banking which is overpriced. That being said, it has had a remaining prestige, okay? And what I've noticed lately, which is quite interesting, is for quite a few years we paid very little attention to Switzerland. Switzerland didn't really fit into the category for our clients. And that were easier. Part of the reason was Switzerland had gotten really difficult to bank in. And what was the deal? But now, make a lot of wealth in crypto, and even with a lot more Americans who are wanting to renounce citizenship, move abroad, maybe people who have made a lot of money in Silicon Valley, etc., the Swiss banks actually have become much more attractive. And so there's a spectrum of them that you can look at, starting with something like Simbank. This is CIM Bank, or however you want to pronounce it. Anyway, it has been for quite a few years there as kind of this more accessible option for people. It's been available to people without having large balances, etc. And they've kind of gone on the prestige of being, hey, we're a Swiss bank, right? In reality, I think it's been overpriced, and so we've rarely worked with them. Okay, so not to say that it's a terrible bank, it's not great, it's not terrible, but to me, what are they really offering? They put you through quite a bit, and the costs are pretty high in terms of the fees. So that was not ever too attractive to me. That being said, some people may use them, and sometimes it's useful. Okay, you also have something like Swissquote, which is a brokerage firm. So you can go and you can get that, and there's some useful deposit functionality in Swissquote. There's actually a bunch of these where you can get some kind of bank functionality from Swiss brokerage firms. So that's another thing that is fairly attractive, and a person can go in there in certain cases. Usually we prefer IB or Saxo Bank or something like that to Swissquote, but again, fees tend to be higher on Swissquote. But there's some cases where that's useful, and there are some others like them. Those are not really where we see the attention today. Today we see the attention in private banking and wealth management, which is really where a lot of these places like Andorra, places like Switzerland, to some extent Singapore, although I would say they have less developed wealth management, private banking there. Obviously, like Morgan Stanley, big banks like that want to try and place their attention. And the reason for this is pretty obvious. Normal retail banking, not so profitable, right? How are you going to make lots of money off of people paying $20 a month fees? And the pressure is to go down to $0 a month fees, transaction fees going to close to zero. You're not earning interest off of them, et cetera, right? Them depositing their money actually has negative interest on the account balances, so it doesn't make a lot of sense. This being said, private banking, you charge a percentage of money under management, and so that kind of has the same effect. And they're much more selective in that regard. However, you can get a much higher level of service, you can get kind of special treatment, a lot of things can just be made easier for you. And so over the last number of years, we've in particular worked with Julius Baer and Safra Bank, who are the number 3 and 5 largest banks in Switzerland, respectively. And there's a lot of really cool things they can do. There's a lot that they're willing to take on. Now, realistically, you're absolute minimum of $500,000 or euros or whatever equivalent in like a minimum balance in order to qualify for those accounts. Realistically, what they will tell you is really they want 2 million, but somewhere in there. There's some others like EFG, and there's a variety of others that we will work with. And some of them, it's kind of that $1 million to get in level. Again, as low as 500,000, usually $1 million. Sometimes more. Now keep in mind, this is not money that you're going to put into a deposit account and have it sitting there in dollars. They want you to do something with that money. So they don't really care that much. Some of them have good gold desks. Some of them have reasonable stock trading platforms, although usually not competitive with the discount brokerages. Sometimes you can use their fund management services. There's all different kind of sophisticated things they can do for you. Are they great? I've never been a fan of wealth management and private banking in the sense that I don't think that the cost to reward is particularly good. And a simple example of this is you can look at lots of data which has been put together on ETFs versus fund managers. And generally speaking, fund managers don't outperform the market. So what are you paying them for, right? This being said, in today's day and age, what you need is partially just banking. And it's been very difficult. And okay, there's maybe some of these little fintechs that start up that are perfectly good if you're dealing with small amounts of money, right? If I'm dealing with low 5 figures, maybe even to low 6 figures, I'm happy to flow money through there, etc. Do my transactional banking. The costs are maybe low. The ease is pretty good. The online banking is pretty good, etc. But if I'm going to keep 7 figures in a bank, do I want to keep it there? For me, I would do that in Singapore. I would do that in probably Dubai. I would do that in Switzerland. There's a few other places. And so when I think about it from that standpoint, if you're going to have a large amount of wealth and you're making fairly large investments at once, say taking position sizes, the discount brokerage rate don't make that much difference for you. And so if you're able to buy into a stock or a fund, et cetera, you can generally access broad global markets, including, for example, being able to invest in Russian stocks, et cetera. There's a lot of flexibility in terms of things like structuring through trusts, corporations, including offshore. It's like, really, when you're a wealth management client at some of these banks, whether you have for your personal holding company a BVI company, they don't really care. Now, this is not a transactional bank account. You're not sitting there and saying, hey, listen, I'm accepting payments from my customers all the time. But they're much more flexible in this regard. Likewise, they're much more willing to be accommodating and understand crypto transactions. So we've had some cases recently with people with large amounts of money, right? Tons and tons of money that they've made in crypto, and it's hard to show the records, right? You're like, okay, well, I was mining for this time, and then I had money from this exchange, and that exchange no longer exists. And they're willing to invest the effort into understanding what the source of funds is in order to make that work. And I think there's a pretty significant advantage to that. On top of that, you can sometimes get cool features. So for instance, pretty much whatever type of credit card or whatever that you're interested in, we can arrange to have that facilitated, right? You're like, oh, I want like an Amex Centurion card. Okay, that can be arranged. You want this, that can be arranged. So there's a lot of cool things like that that can be put in place. Now, some people ask me, how difficult are these accounts to open? And the thing that I would say is there's a difference. When I refer to the difficulty of opening an account, what I often mean is what's the likelihood you'll get turned down? Okay, so there's the paperwork side, like, how much hassle are they going to put you through? And in a bunch of these banks, they're going to put you through pretty stringent source of funds. That's going to be a fairly complex process to go through to prove where does the money come from, to make sure that everything is solid. Usually, though, if you have a sufficient amount of money and your source of funds is not nuts and you're not a politically exposed person, which, by the way, the definition of politically exposed person is pretty interesting because it includes, for example, major athletes. So that's kind of a weird thing. Anyway, provided you're not in that situation, the likelihood you can get an account opened is quite high. Now, a few things that might be worth noting. I had some people who were, had made quite good money a little while ago, and they were moving to a country that they'd been apparently told by some Swiss banks, hey, listen, Switzerland does not deal with these people. I don't know where they got this from. I don't know why they were told this, but we deal with private bankers, and I was able to call them up, and it was not a problem to arrange accounts for them. So I haven't noticed many of these restrictions. Now, there are some cases where this could be true. Ironically, I had a call with a banker not too long ago, and I was having this discussion, and I said, hey, listen, what are the jurisdictions that you have problems with? And he said, well, Iran is difficult, Syria is difficult, America is difficult. And I thought, wow, what a crazy world that, the US would probably like to consider themselves so different from Iran and Syria. Like, those are the bad guys, we're the good guys. Of course, you want the good guys, not the bad guys. And to the banks, they were like, hey, listen, these guys are together. They're in the same pot. So very, very interesting. From this standpoint, it is worth noting, some people might ask, well, what if I renounce my US citizenship? Some of the experiences that we've seen with this are you can end up in a situation where you need to document and demonstrate that you're no longer a US person. And then they may decide, hey, listen, we want you to put a substantial balance on deposit on balance. And, if you can make that work, then that's fine. That can be accommodated. That being said, do be aware that, there can be some navigating in there. And the more difficult your case, the more they want to, have it worth their while. And so it's a business in that respect. And, is the value there? It depends, right? I think there's a certain value to the security of your money today. I think there's a certain value to being able to get high quality banking, to have somebody who understands you, somebody who you can have on WhatsApp. This is another thing somebody was asking, was like, what is private banking? So my experience of private banking is, hey, my banker is on WhatsApp and I can WhatsApp him or Telegram or whatever the messaging system is to say, hey, I need this, give me this, et cetera. And they're generally quite widely available to you. There's a lot they can do for you. They will often, if you're looking at things like loans, now if the loans are very small, then that might be a different situation, but there's a lot that they can facilitate that wouldn't normally be the case if you were just kind of dealing with retail banking. So anyway, bottom line is it's certainly possible to have happen. It certainly can be done, relatively, there are a lot of cases when you might not have an easy time getting other banking that you actually can get very high quality Swiss banking. And so in that respect, it is pretty worthwhile. But do be aware, the fees are fairly high, and the onboarding process, depending on the bank, there's some spectrum here, can be slow and involve quite a bit of paperwork. So I hope that helps. It gives a little bit of a background on the state of Swiss banking today. If you'd like help with that or bank accounts in general, please reach out to us. You can book a call, like I said, calendly.com/Michael-Rosmer. You can send us a message through offshorecitizen.net or offshorecapitalist.com. Hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, hit the like button, all those things. Appreciate your support, and I'm going to see you guys on the next video.